Why should I?
Why should you? Do you like being on the latrine detail, or do you rather play football?
You've gone mad. He's a fucking German.
Yes, I am. I'm not playing with no bleeding kraut.
He's the best goalkeeper that'll ever stand between them posts.
We are not his kameraden.
Coach Jack stumbles upon an incredible discovery inside a British POW camp, a Nazi soldier who appears to be a once-in-a-century, generational talent at goalkeeper. Facing a relentless barrage of shots from a dozen men, this soldier effortlessly deflects every single ball with ease. Refusing to be outdone, the coach's daughter, Margaret, decides to step up and teach him a lesson herself. Facing the beautiful young woman, the soldier seemingly lets one slide past him on purpose. Just then, a British military officer storms over, visibly enraged, and immediately puts an end to the shooting game. He strictly forbids Nazi prisoners from having any contact whatsoever with British civilians. However, a sudden twist of fate quickly changes everything. Because Coach Jack's current goalkeeper is utterly terrible, his team has plummeted to the dead bottom of the league standings, causing the team's financial investors to completely lose faith in them. Hearing this news, the coach's heart sinks, but to desperately keep the investors at bay, he confidently vows that he will turn the team's performance around in no time. With his back against the wall, Jack is forced to carry a box of premium cigars, a massive fortune at the time, and march right back through the gates of the POW camp. He wants to lease that Nazi soldier for just a single day to save his crumbling ball club. Yet, on the drive back, Jack intentionally maintains his distance from Bert, his eyes full of pure disgust and contempt. Bert returns the favor with an equally unmistakable hostility, completely ignoring the old coach's words, which utterly infuriates Jack. Upon arriving at their destination, Jack throws a roll of gauze at Bert, ordering him to wrap it around his throat to disguise himself as a wounded soldier who cannot speak. Jack reminds him that every Nazi soldier in that POW camp lives a completely miserable existence, forced to do the filthiest, most grueling labor by day, and routinely awakened at random hours of the night. Now, handed a golden ticket to change his destiny, Bert is incredibly acting like he doesn't care. Faced with the immediate threat of being sent back to endless hard labor, Bert finally compromises and quietly wraps the gauze around his neck. After all, soccer is the singular beacon of light in his bleak, war-torn life as a prisoner. However, back in the locker room, when Bert mindlessly speaks out loud, his thick German accent lands like a bomb, instantly detonating the entire room. Bert makes no effort to hide his identity. He openly rips the gauze from his neck. The players' protests explode, nearly tearing the roof off the building. In the eyes of the British public at the time, Germans were synonymous with the ultimate atrocities of war. But the coach couldn't care less about the optics. He knows it's a do-or-die situation, and the team simply cannot afford to lose this match. Under pressure from the referee and the desperate pleading of their coach, the players have no choice but to take the pitch, completely fueled by hostility and disdain. The pitch is the ultimate proving ground. The referee blows the whistle, and Bert steps onto a British soccer field for the very first time. At first, he looks visibly tense, but the split second an opponent unleashes a ferocious shot, the raw instinct buried deep inside his body violently wakes up. He executes a spectacular diving save, prompting Jack to applaud in wild excitement. This is merely the opening act. From that moment on, he transforms into an absolute brick wall, using his mind-blowing reflexes and anticipation to deny the opponent's shots time and time again. Even more shocking is that he isn't just a defensive anchor. His powerful, long-range hand throws become the team's ultimate weapon for counterattacks. The massive victory leaves Jack absolutely ecstatic, and he decides on the spot to keep Bert for the remainder of the season. But when he returns home in high spirits, a massive domestic storm is waiting for him. Not only is his daughter furious with him,
Drove Hitler home, did you?
but his wife also openly expresses her deep disapproval. Even his young daughter and his 80-year-old mother vehemently oppose him associating with a Nazi soldier, fearing their family will become targets for public condemnation and scrutiny. But the coach refuses to believe he is in the wrong. He firmly tells his family that he will not only keep letting Bert play soccer, but he is also going to bring him to work at their family grocery shop. A week later, Bert shows up at the shop. His presence sends Margaret into a state of extreme anxiety, her heart a messy mix of deep-seated hatred and quiet curiosity. But when Bert politely greets her, She freezes in pure nervousness, unable to find her words, and quickly lowers her head in shame. Her best friend even drops by to warn her, telling her to stay on high guard around this Nazi captive. Yet, before her friend's warnings can even fade, Bert is already striking up a friendly conversation with her young little sister. Noticing this, Margaret immediately steps in to shut it down, forcefully ordering her sister to leave the room. This highly unusual hostility immediately raises questions in Bert's mind.
You think you just come in, play some football, and everything's forgiven and forgotten? Forgiven that you lot killed my friends? You know, instead of going out dancing, we had to spend our evenings in a bomb shelter, hoping our houses are still standing and our family and friends still alive when we get home.
I'd rather have danced with you than stood on the battlefield.
In the face of profound, deep-seated national hatred, any defense Bert offers falls entirely flat. He quietly retreats to the storage room, picks up a battered old soccer ball, and begins day in, day out training in the empty alleyways. He pours his blood and sweat into nurturing his hope, using his actions to silently melt the iceberg of prejudice around him. He goes as far as handcrafting a pair of stilts for the little sister, patiently teaching her how to play. Margaret witnesses all of this in secret, and the rigid walls around her heart slowly begin to crumble. At the exact same time, Bert's chemistry with his teammates on the pitch grows stronger by the day. Their spectacular performance and Cinderella run draw roaring applause from countless fans, and the coach's attitude toward him shifts completely, from absolute disdain to genuine, heartfelt validation. One afternoon, Margaret's pet bird accidentally escapes and flies up onto the roof rafters. At the exact same time, chaos strikes outside as Coach Jack's flock of sheep suddenly begins to stampede in pure panic. Hearing the frantic shouts, Bert rushes out of the house, but hesitates for a split second. Right at the threshold, caught between chasing the sheep or catching the bird, he decisively chooses the latter, leaving Jack entirely on his own, helplessly running after the sheep outside. With Bert joining the rescue indoors, the erratic bird is safely coaxed back into its cage in no time. Margaret gazes deeply at him, suddenly realizing that this man might not be the cold-blooded monster everyone claims he is. Meanwhile, under Bert's brilliant leadership on the pitch, the team goes on an absolute tear, making a historic push to escape the relegation zone. But right at this critical turning point, a mandatory group screening inside the POW camp drags Bert straight into a dark abyss of trauma. The commanding officer plays a brutal documentary, capturing the horrific atrocities committed inside Nazi concentration camps. The heartbreaking, nightmarish footage violently triggers a suppressed memory Bert has never been able to forgive himself for. In the occupied territories of Ukraine, a Nazi officer once confiscated a little boy's soccer ball, promising to give it back if the boy played a little game with him. The innocent boy believed him, built up the courage to snatch the ball back, and turned around to run, completely unaware that the officer had already quietly pulled back the trigger. Bert stepped in and bravely intervened, successfully saving the child's life. The next second, the enraged officer spun around and pointed the gun directly at Bert's face. The paralyzing terror of that memory violently snaps Bert back to reality. Following the screening, the suffocating guilt proves too heavy a burden for one of the prisoners, who chooses to hang himself the very next morning. Furious and distraught, Bert confronts the commanding officer, only to be told that the dead soldier had committed unspeakable crimes during the war. He was essentially executed by his own conscience. Bert falls dead silent. During their tense exchange, Bert accidentally drops a carved wooden puppet necklace, which the officer picks up, recognizing it as a traditional accessory worn by citizens in the occupied territories. The officer is left deeply suspicious, wondering what secrets Bert is hiding. From that day on, Bert becomes increasingly withdrawn and silent. Sensing his heavy burden, Margaret decides to break the ice, handing him a glass of fresh lemonade and striking up a conversation. Bert opens up his heart, revealing that his true passion is dancing, explaining that the sensation feels like flying, a rare escape where he can completely forget all his misery. Their deep emotional connection is abruptly cut short by Margaret's boyfriend, Bill, who storms in, practically suffocating in pure jealousy. Bert chooses not to engage, but during the very next match, he pulls off a breathtakingly romantic and incredibly bold stunt on the pitch. After leaping up to snag a high, drifting cross, instead of immediately throwing the ball out to launch a counterattack, he stops dead in his tracks and looks directly up at Margaret in the stands. Right there on the field, cradling the soccer ball like a dance partner, he begins to execute light, elegant dance steps. The entire stadium erupts in utter bewilderment, but Margaret breaks into a profound, knowing smile. Shortly after, the historic news of the war's end breaks, and announcements detail that all prisoners of war will be repatriated back to Germany. While the entire nation celebrates this monumental moment, Margaret and Jack are left looking utterly devastated. At the same time, Margaret's best friend drops by to celebrate, assuming everyone is thrilled that the camp is finally shutting down. But as her friend gushes with congratulations, Margaret reacts with nothing but cold indifference. The sudden, icy wall catches her friend completely off guard. Furious and utterly confused, she storms out of the house. The league is down to the final do-or-die match of the season. If Bert abandons them now, all the team's grueling progress will evaporate into thin air. However, to everyone's absolute shock, Bert chooses to stay, fiercely determined to honor his promise and fight through this critical battle. Jack's family throws him a lavish farewell dinner to show their gratitude. Across the dinner table, the undeniable, magnetic love flowing between Margaret and Bert does not go unnoticed. Jack watches them quietly, seeing everything. Opening whistle blows, and the high-stakes relegation match gets underway. The opposing side strikes first, just as Jack begins to lose all heart. His eyes scan the crowd and freeze on a familiar face in the stands. The legendary manager of the English First Division powerhouse, Manchester City. This shocking discovery breathes brand new life into Jack. During halftime, he marches into the locker room and fires up his squad, telling them that this is no longer just a battle against relegation. This is the ultimate stage that will define their entire professional futures. The squad charges into the second half with electrified morale, but the equalizer refuses to fall. The sheer, suffocating anxiety becomes too much for Jack to bear. He retreats deep into the empty locker room, hiding away, too terrified to even look at the pitch. Suddenly, a deafening, stadium-shaking roar explodes from the stands. Peering frantically through the locker room window, Jack witnesses his team miraculously bury the equalizer to tie the game. But a split second later, disaster strikes as the opponents draw a foul, earning a dangerously well-positioned free kick. The referee blows the whistle, the ball is struck, and Bert launches himself into the air like a soaring eagle, flawlessly snatching the projectile safely into his chest. He unleashes a monstrous long-range hand throw that cuts through nearly the entire length of the pitch, landing with pinpoint accuracy right at Bill's feet. Bill drives the ball deep into the box, executes a brilliant maneuver to juke the keeper, and fires a spectacular walk-off winner into the back of the net. The whistle blows. The team has successfully escaped relegation. Amidst a sea of roaring, chaotic celebration, the Manchester City manager marches straight past the crowds, heads directly to Bert, and extends an official invitation to the big leagues. Bert now stands at a massive crossroads, torn between a flawless, glittering future in the top-tier division, or the quiet, charming town and the beautiful girl who had finally accepted him. That night, at a bittersweet farewell party hosted in his honor, a sweeping, melodic song fills the room. Bert and Margaret step into the center of the floor, locking fingers and melting into a slow dance. Their tightly intertwined hands and deeply affectionate gazes announce to the entire room exactly where their hearts belong. The beautiful sight cuts Bill like a knife. Consumed by rage, Bill drags Bert out into a torrential downpour on the empty pitch, demanding a high-stakes penalty shootout to decisively settle who gets to be with Margaret. However, as Bill fires his shot into the net, Bert stands completely frozen, refusing to make a single move to save it. Margaret isn't a trophy to be won in a game. Who she chooses to love is a decision that belongs entirely to her. That night, when Bert returns to his room, he finds Margaret already inside waiting for him. After sharing an intimate night together, the two privately vow to spend the rest of their lives together. Shortly after, they hold a beautiful wedding ceremony, and Bert officially signs with Manchester City, ready to kick off a brand new chapter of his life. However, what awaits him is not a path of flowers and applause, but a massive public relations hurricane that completely engulfs the entire city. During his first official press conference, journalists ruthlessly rip open his past, They expose not only that he voluntarily joined the Nazi forces, but that he was also a decorated Iron Cross recipient, bluntly branding him a cold-blooded war criminal to his face. Facing the razor-sharp interrogation, Bert refuses to hide and admits to everything. Overnight, his name spreads like wildfire through every street and alley of Manchester. A tidal wave of public condemnation follows. Tens of thousands of Jewish citizens march into the streets, holding high banners of protest, fiercely boycotting this Nazi player. Manchester City Football Club sees its reputation dragged through the mud, facing a crushing, unbearable amount of pressure. Inside the stadium locker room, the atmosphere is dead silent, while the world outside roars like a tsunami of pure hatred and insults. The manager stands firm, looking his squad in the eye and declaring that sports have nothing to do with politics. They are a single unit, and they must stand together. Bert steps onto the pitch under an absolute mountain of psychological pressure. The roaring boos behind his back hit him like a violent storm, and the immense mental strain causes him to make a critical blunder, botching a routine clearance and handing the ball straight to the opponent's feet. Fortunately, he immediately redeems himself, making a spectacular dive to save the ensuing shot, but the team ultimately drops the match. After the final whistle, a mob of furious fans surrounds the team bus, and someone even breaks through the crowd to physically assault Bert. That very night, the club calls an emergency board meeting to decide whether to cut Bert from the roster. Right at the height of the debate, the coach and Margaret march into the boardroom. But no matter how passionately they defend Bert, the Jewish representatives among the fans refuse to listen until Margaret steps forward and declares that she is Bert's wife, causing the chaotic shouting to temporarily grind to a halt. Margaret delivers a deeply heartfelt, moving speech. While her words don't instantly erase the city's burning rage, her sheer bravery and unwavering loyalty give Bert an infinite amount of strength. From that day forward, Bert channels all the suffocating pressure and toxic insults into raw, explosive motivation on the pitch. He uses his elite skill to reclaim his respect. One major newspaper writes a defining review. If this goalkeeper is indeed a decent human being, as they say, then why not let him play? Every individual deserves to be judged solely on their own personal merit. The tides of public opinion officially turn, and the media begins to shower praise on his elite professionalism. Bert has finally earned his respect through sheer dominance, and his family soon celebrates the arrival of a beautiful new baby. However, the hands of fate are about to pull back the curtain on the most brutal, agonizing trial of his entire life. It is 1956, the historic FA Cup final that would be etched into the annals of soccer history forever. Manchester City versus Birmingham. Fighting for the first championship trophy in club history, Bert takes the pitch with his morale blazing. The match is intensely fierce. Manchester City strikes first to take the lead, but Birmingham quickly answers back with an equalizer. The opponents weaponize a dangerous sideline throw-in, launching a massive ball deep into the box, followed by a ferocious strike that flies straight into the dead corner of the net, the upper 90, leaving Bert completely helpless to stop it. Heading into the second half, Manchester City recaptures the lead, and Bert delivers a brilliant, long-range assist to his teammate, widening the gap to 3-1. The championship trophy feels like an absolute certainty. However, with only 20 minutes left on the clock before the final whistle, disaster strikes. During a dangerous cross from Birmingham, their charging forward collides violently with Bert, who had leaped out to clear the ball. Bert takes a catastrophic blow to the head, collapsing to the turf instantly, completely unconscious. The entire Wembley Stadium falls dead silent in a heartbeat. Watching the broadcast at home, Margaret and her family feel their hearts leap into their throats. Everyone assumes he is finished, but just as the medical staff prepares to carry him off the pitch on a stretcher, Bert, a man forged of pure steel, miraculously pushes himself up to his feet. Clutching his severely injured neck, he signals to the bench that he can grind it out. Little does anyone know, his post-game diagnosis would shock the entire nation of Britain. His fifth cervical vertebra was completely fractured and wedged straight into the sixth, leaving him literally a millimeter away from death. He was actively risking his life to protect the net. For the remainder of the match, dragging a literally broken neck, he executes flying dive after flying dive, blocking out one surefire shot after another. When the final whistle blows, Manchester City secures the championship. Bert is named the undisputed man of the match, and the Queen of England herself steps down to present him with his medal. But the moment he steps into the tunnel heading back to the locker room, his body finally gives out, and he collapses heavily to the floor. After a thorough examination, the doctors reveal the terrifying reality of his injury. Bert's legendary heroism spreads like wildfire across the UK, completely transforming him from a hated Nazi war criminal into a beloved national hero. Yet the cruelty of fate is far from over. While recovering from his catastrophic injury, his mind becomes endlessly haunted by flashbacks of that boy shot in Ukraine, revealing the horrifying, hidden truth. Back then, he hadn't actually stepped in to stop his commanding officer. Instead, he had stood by and watched the little boy get executed. When he approached the boy's still warm body afterward, he noticed the carved puppet necklace around his neck and kept it on him ever since. Now, as this living nightmare floods his consciousness once more, a suffocating, long-delayed wave of guilt intensifies by the day. Desperate for comfort, he calls his wife to open up his heart. But on the other end of the line, he only hears the cheerful voice of his young son, begging for ice cream. Margaret initially tries to refuse, arguing that it is too cold for treats, but Bert decisively steps in over the phone and tells her to let the boy have it. That exact sentence would become the single most agonizing regret of his entire life. The very next second, right after his son successfully purchases the ice cream, the piercing screech of tires and his wife's soul-shattering screams rip violently through the phone receiver. A freak, sudden car accident takes the life of his only child. The devastating grief of losing his son acts like the ultimate final straw, completely shattering the Iron Man. He spirals into darkness, firmly believing this is God's divine punishment for the sins of his past. Upon his discharge from the hospital, Bert chooses to retire from the pitch, spending his days guarding his son's grave, repenting in agonizing silence. One day, the British commanding officer from the POW camp unexpectedly appears before him. It turns out that the officer's own wife and children were also killed during a German bombing raid, and they rest eternally in this exact same cemetery. Having finally let go of his own hatred, the officer tries to deliver some profound, comforting advice, but his words hit Bert like a sharp knife, instantly detonating his heavily suppressed emotions into a desperate, physical struggle between the two men. Once the dust settles, the officer places the long-buried wooden puppet necklace back into Bert's hands. The boy's relic feels heavier than a mountain. In that quiet moment of pure epiphany, Bert finally wakes up. He goes home and confesses the dark secret buried deep in his soul to his wife, unveiling the raw, bloody truth about what actually happened to the boy in Ukraine. A human being cannot live in the shadows of the past forever. With Margaret's fierce, unwavering support, Bert makes his historic return to the team. The moment he steps back out onto the pitch, the entire stadium erupts into the most passionate, roaring standing ovation of his career. He continues to write his own impossible legend, eventually logging an incredible 545 appearances for Manchester City, before finally retiring in 1964 at the age of 41. At his official farewell match, emotional fans actually tear down the stadium goalposts, because in their hearts, absolutely no one could ever replace the legendary Bert Trautmann.